Hi there, I'm Eric Wordweaver Sjerven, Gothi of the Ridgar folk here in East Texas, and I'd like to welcome you to the Raven's Call. This is a show where I ramble on about different heathen-related subjects, just kind of whatever strikes my fancy, sets my mind on fire at the time. Big UPG warning at the beginning of this episode, like always. This is just my view on the world, my take on the world. I am not the end-all be-all authority on anything heathen. I am just a heathen here in East Texas that leads his tribe and does his thing in his own way. My views don't even necessarily reflect the views of my own tribe members. It's just my take on the world, and hopefully it serves as a conversation starter. So, all my contact information is down below, interact, all that stuff. Please send in requests and questions. I get great show ideas off of those. I am going to be hitting more of those as they come in. Do not be afraid to poke me if you've sent one and I haven't touched on it and I said I'd get back to you at some point, because as you guys know from following the channel, I'm insanely busy these days and some things get shuffled down the list and missed, and I really don't want to miss any because some of them require some background work, some research and things like that, and so I could use a nudge to say, hey, don't forget my question. Be like, you're right, fantastic, yes, let me get on this. I do my best, but I'm only human. It is what it is. It's a thing. So, one of the things I wanted to touch base on real quick at the beginning of this particular episode is that a number of people have been hitting me up about when I'm going to start up East Texas Heathen stuff again. A lot of you know that I took kind of a hiatus for the kind of COVID situation, and so ended up pulling back on that pretty heavily, and haven't had a park moot in over a year. About a year and a half, actually. It was last spring, I think, was the last one we had, and we ended up canceling one because of the whole COVID situation breaking out. I was in the middle of the time, I was working like 91 days straight. Things were nuts. Anyway, so it went kind of by the wayside for a while. We laid off while the COVID thing was going on, and they had all the regulations, and it was a pain. Anyway, I'm firing those back up. So if you're watching this before the event, and you're in the East Texas area, please don't travel for this, okay, guys? This is just a bunch of guys and gals getting together in a park and sitting and bullshitting for a little while. But I'm doing one on the 26th June at Southside Park in Tyler, Texas. So if you're interested, hit up the Facebook page, confirm so that I know who to expect, and all that. But please don't travel for this, guys. It's not worth it, okay? I'm putting it up, I'm sharing it out to the groups and stuff, but it is not something that needs, I don't need people coming from like Tennessee or something like that, making the drive, coming down to hit for like a 2-hour visit in the park. This is for locals. But I do want people to see that we are doing this, and I encourage you guys to do the same. Definitely, we're at a point where we can get out there and we can start doing these things, and we can start ramping up the community again. And if you're in an area where you've really got to worry about the whole COVID safety aspect of things, I recommend public venues like a park where it's really easy to distance if that's what you need. You're outside, you're not in an enclosed space kind of thing. I prefer outside spaces for these kind of meetups anyway, just because I think it's a better fit. It's more enjoyable to sit and visit. Now, as you can tell from the rosy complexion and sweat beating off of me, we are in the hot box part of Texas. It started as a post I saw rolling around, a TikTok video rolling around. Swamp season has started, swamp ass season, and it is definitely swamp ass season. It's muggy, it's humid, it's hot, but I'm still doing it. I'm still getting out there, and I know at least some of my locals will get out there and do it, and hopefully I'll have some updates for you guys on how it went after the event. So, and I loosely call it an event. It's a meetup. I call it a park moot, but moot's just a meetup. It's nothing huge. It's nothing official. I'm not planning big events or anything like that. It's a get-together. It's a visit. Maybe talk about some heathen stuff. I may do some guided conversation, but that's pretty much it. It's mostly meet and greet, so people in the area can get to know each other. So, building community, grassroots heathenry, hashtag. So, without any further ado, let's go ahead and jump into today's subject, shall we? Now, today's subject is on the Lady Air. This is one that has been heavily requested. And normally, I'm of an opinion that I don't really like to do God videos because there's so many different ways to view the gods. I may do some educational aspects of the gods, but one of those things that if you step in and you do a video on the gods, you got to be ready for a lot of backlash, a lot of people saying, that's not how I see them, that's not how I see this, you got this wrong, you got that wrong, this is just interpretation, or your information's bad. It's real easy to step sideways when you're dealing with the gods, but this is one that I thought, okay, we can go ahead and toe in, because it is an area that is of interest to a number of people for deeply personal reasons, and there's not a lot of information. All right, so that's what the whole notepad here is. I was doing some research. Ooh, that felt good. I was doing some research earlier, and I wanted to jot down a few notes for this particular one because there really isn't a lot of information. Okay, and there's a couple of reasons for that. All right, now Eir herself, Eir is a goddess, and that's E-I-R. Eir is a goddess that is commonly associated with healing. Her name is said to correlate with help or mercy, and that's I haven't gone back and double checked the translations and stuff myself on that one. I'm kind of going on what I've read, and that's I'm just going to let that one slide. I'll go back and study etymology and stuff on the name later, but that's not one that I'm super worried about at the moment. The thematic element of it works anyway, as far as a mnemonic to remember what it is that Eir is associated with, but that's the whole purpose of today's video, isn't it? Now, Eir is a confusing one to touch base on because Eir is only mentioned a couple of times in the extant lore, which severely limits our ability to build an understanding of personality and purview and things like that. The biggest entries for her really are in the story of Svipdag. Now, I'm going to go through, I'll come back to the Svipdag aspect here in a minute because I need to lay some groundwork first, okay? You are going to find some confusing information if you go and look up Eir and her associations. The most common is that she is one of the handmaidens of Frigga, and that's always kind of been the basis of my operating procedures and operating parameters. But when you break down the literature and the lore, and you start looking at some of the associations, what you find is that Eir is most specifically mentioned in the lore as a handmaiden of Menglod. And Menglod is not clearly stated whether she is giantess, goddess, etc. It's kind of left vague, but she is the fated bride of Svipdag, hence the Svipdagsmal. And it's actually specifically in Fjordvensmal, which is a subset. Svipdagsmal is actually a subset of the prophecy of Groa, who is a seeress that he raises from the dead, and then the lay of Fjordvensmal, which is the story wherein he meets Menglod, and you get the introduction of Menglod's handmaidens, one of which is mentioned to be Eir. Now, the reason this gets dodgy is because we've got two associations already. We've got Frigga and we've got Menglod. There's also an association with Frøya, as far as being one of Frøya's handmaidens. Let's add another layer in there. She's also said to be a Valkyrie, who is also, in service to Odin. Now, there's nothing saying she can't have multiple allegiances. This is tribal based, and so there's a lot of crossover and things like that. Just because she's someone's handmaiden doesn't mean she can't also be a Valkyrie. Frøya herself is a goddess and a Valkyrie, leader of the Valkyries in some attestations. So this kind of the gods don't compartmentalize into specific roles. We're not talking about Greek gods here where they've got one role and they're known for that. And even that's an oversimplification of the actual lore of Greek mythology. That's just what it's been boiled down to by popular media and by the way the Greeks interacted with their gods and goddesses. But there's a lot of crossover purviews and things like that. Same thing with the Norse pantheon. There's a lot of crossover purviews. There's a lot of crossover realms of interaction. And you see things pop up in different areas that are, you'll see a god pop up in one area that's like, why is that god there? What is the association here? That's not really what we associate their purview with, but it doesn't mean that they're bound to that. I mean, the gods are their own individual entities and can do whatever they want to do. So you're going to get a lot of crossover. So with Air, we're looking at possibly a handmaiden of Frigga, Frøya, Menglod, and a Valkyrie of Odin. So there's 4 different associations there. No wonder this gets complicated and difficult to track. Okay? Now, in all reality, this boils down a little bit easier, because the way people look at it, if you study the lore, if you look at some of the different scholarship as far as associations in the lore and whatnot, it is highly likely that Menglod is actually an alternate name, and most frequently she is associated with Frøya. So, if you look at that and see Menglod as Frøya, because the doorkeep for Menglod that gets into the didactic back and forth with Svipdag, as Svipdag is coming to court Menglod and find his way in to see her, is, I believe, Thorolfson, which is another name for Odin that is listed in another poem. So if the idea of the guard being Odin in disguise, which tracks with some of the other lore that we've got, where Odin will wear disguises and grill heroes and gods in this kind of didactic sense, it definitely tracks. It definitely tracks as far as that style goes and what they're doing there. The thematic elements are there across the lore. So I really don't have a problem with that. Now, with that, it is most likely that Air is then actually a handmaiden of Frøya, which makes sense if you associate the Valkyrie aspect with Odin, because Frøya herself is tied to the Valkyrie, and this correlation therefore ties together nicely in a bow. The only thing is that frequently it's been associated that Air is a handmaiden of Frigga. She's listed amongst Frigga's handmaidens. Well, I am not one to go the reductionist route of associating Frøya and Frigga as the same goddess. I see them as separate goddesses. I see them as 2 different individuals and worship them as such. However, I do understand that if you ascribe to that particular train of thought, then everything is wrapped up in a nice, neat little bow, because Frøya is Frigga in that reductionist kind of approach. So, there you have it. The messy correlations of Air all tie up in one nice little bow with a little bit of back end work. If you go fully reductionist on it, then, you know, Frigga, Frøya being the same entity, then Air is a handmaiden of Frigga, Frøya, etc., etc. Now, I'm more of the approach currently, after having done a lot of this research, that Air is probably most likely tied to Frøya as her handmaiden, and that Menglod is indeed an alternate name for Frøya. I would be okay with that as a theory. And then the correlation of Svipdag to Odr, who is Frøya's lost husband. In the end of the Fjolsvindmal and Svipdagmal, you end up with a line where Menglod welcomes Svipdag back to her after this grilling with Odin in disguise out front. You're dealing with it's that world building poetry didactic back and forth, wherein Odin is answering questions or asking questions. Usually it's Odin asking the questions. This time it's him answering the questions. It goes back and forth, but still he's usually involved in this back and forth in between in most instances, except for Thor and the dwarves and things like that. But all this while, Svipdag is actually hiding his name from the gatekeeper, so as to go incognito until the big reveal, I am Svipdag. And it was said that Svipdag is the only one that could get in to see Menglod, and he's like, oh, well, okay, by all means, come inside. And then it's all wrapped up nicely. It's just an excuse to go through some more world-building elements of names and things like that, keeping in mind that the Poetic Edda and the Prose Edda largely are put together in ways that help to... The ones that survive are largely pulled together in ways that help kind of keep skaldic poetry alive. And so It's a large part of why we have what we have of the lores, because the value is seen in those for, preserving skaldic poetry and the associations, the kennings that are there. So there you go. It's an interesting point. So it's not clearly stated, like Snorri, when he goes through and lists out the goddesses in Asgard, the Asenyur. He does not list Eir amongst them, but then he does, in another point, go on to say that she's one of the most important goddesses. And she's also mentioned in the Prose Edda. But the gist is that when you get into and you start looking at Svipdagsmal, Fjolsvidmal, you end up seeing that Menglod is associated with aiding, helping, and healing in a lot of ways, and that purview is extended to her handmaidens, and that's where we get the extension of healing and whatnot to Eir. Now, Eir is more specifically mentioned as a healer and is tied to that healing aspect. So you're going to see a lot in modern culture, modern heathen culture, tying things to Eir with regards to healing, both in mental health and physical health. Now, there's not a lot of mention with regards to the mental health side of things, because mental health wasn't really a thing back in the day that was enumerated and specifically mentioned and specifically paid attention to. That doesn't mean that they didn't care for mental health, it just means they didn't look at it the way that we do now. It's a difference in zeitgeist, which is understandable. Different time, different everything. So it makes sense. But you will see mentions of things like heroes falling into melancholy and things like that. And that's directly dealing with depression and whatnot. So these phenomenon existed back then, obviously. They dealt with it. They just didn't necessarily have the terminology or fields of study that we do now, wherein we really drill down and take a look at these things, hence my background. So it's not inappropriate to associate Eir with these things, but it's not explicitly stated either. Again, I'm not a hardcore recon, so I don't care. I definitely think that she envelops an overall feeling of wellness. Now, one of the things that I saw interesting in the research that I was doing was some of the people would associate her Valkyrie aspect as being one that, as choosers of the slain, her role as healer might have extended to choosing those that survived the battle and rose up and healed over time in the aftermath. Nothing specifically states that. That's some UPG stretch, but I find it to be an interesting look and an interesting exploration of Eir and her role within this, because otherwise it might be somewhat difficult to reconcile the choosing of the slain as a Valkyrie and this healer aspect. But in reality it's not, because a healer would have an excellent sense of who's going to make it and who's not. So it's entirely possible that her role as Valkyrie wasn't necessarily to choose who survived, but to recognize those that wouldn't and help to identify the ones that could be chosen and not passed over, because they are fatally wounded and are not going to bounce back from this and make it out the other side. It's hard to say. That's a lot of extrapolation and exploration, because in all reality, the basic gist of what exists within the lore regarding Eir is a couple of name drops, and that's about it. There's not a lot of delving into. I mean, you can get into some of the sagas and extended stuff and maybe find something. I didn't turn much up when I started doing that, but I also haven't spent like weeks studying this either. I've always had a basic understanding of Eir and my interactions with her, based on mostly the same information that I just reviewed earlier. Although I've got some deeper insights into everything now as I have grown over the decades and have turned my attention to some specific areas. But it merits further looking and further exploration. So what does this mean in modern heathenry? Well, it doesn't really change anything as far as dealing with Eir, because Eir, in her associations with healing and with health in general, that all stays the same. That all stays where it's at. All it does is give some background information to help understand Eir a little bit better when you are dealing with her. Now, I have seen associations of copper with Eir as far as a sacred metal, and then there is an Eir flower, spelled E-I-R flower, which is a white flower that is frequently associated with air for obvious reasons. Now, it has multiple other names, but that was one name that I saw associated with this particular plant. And my herbologists and stuff out there may want to look into that and see if there's any kind of associated healing properties with said plant. I don't know. I don't really go into the herbalism side of things. I have other people that handle that within my kind of tribal network. I'm more the philosopher and priest and leader kind of thing. So my witchy women handle a lot of those things, and I gladly let them do that because they are a lot better at it than I am in that respect. So, just so reviewing here, I mean, that's basically a lot of what I was able to find. There's really just not a lot. Most of it's getting to know air as a goddess and interacting with her. Now, it's going to be easy to fall into a trap of just calling upon air when one needs to, when health goes awry. You know, someone's ill, it's time to make an offering to air and see if this person will heal. The problem that I frequently see with individuals making prayers to air in this respect is an element of magical thinking. Imagine that we're dealing with the gods and goddesses. It's understandable that you would do some magical thinking in that respect, but an overstretch of it. An expectation of intervention on a granular level that doesn't necessarily translate to how I see the gods interacting. Again, this is just my view and how I see. I don't see air coming in and healing individual people just because they're sick. I would think that a goddess with a keen understanding of health and the course of life might know better whether or not, you know, she would well understand the course of life, and that sometimes people don't heal from things and people don't bounce back from things because this is the natural course. And interfering with that too terribly much interferes with the balance of things, and the gods, as gods of order, are not going to want to terribly disrupt the natural balance that has been lovingly structured and built over time. So she would recognize that there are reasons for things, and I fear that a number of people may make offerings to air for someone to heal or make it through, and then when that person doesn't, they may become disheartened, disillusioned. Again, I'm one that ascribes more to gods of limited access. I don't necessarily think that the gods interact on a super granular level with us. I think they can. I think their attention can be called in those respects, but I don't necessarily think that's the standard. Could be wrong, just saying. So, that being said, it should be kept in mind as you are dealing with the gods and goddesses that they're not going to be, they're not omnipotent, they're not omniscient, they're not going to be granularly involved in every little thing and answer your beck and call when it comes time to heal somebody. Now, that being said, I do think you can call upon the gods, and especially air in this respect, to gain the luck and strength of that is necessary for the person themselves to overcome the illness, to overcome the ailment, and you may get that blessing. It is absolutely worth it. It is absolutely worth building a relationship with air. My stance on things is it may be worth going through and making some special offerings to air throughout the year. Maybe pick a specific time, build a tribal ritual around air and giving her some due attention, or giving her specific mention in rituals that you do to Freya, in order to build that relationship so that when the time comes, you have that conduit built and she's more likely to respond. Now, there is the tribal extension of, if you are good with the gods in general, you're good with the tribe of the gods, then the individual members of the tribe, through the extension of Frith, are more likely to interact positively with you. And so it's good to build that relationship, that strong connection with the entire tribe as a whole, and then the individual members may be more responsive to you. So some tips and tricks just from my own kind of points of view and approach to things, but make of that what you will. You do you, not my hall, not my call. So hopefully that clears a few things up with regards to air. Like I said, there's not a whole lot going on with respect to that. Offerings, people are going to ask me, what do I recommend as far as an offering goes? Healing herbs. Obviously the things that we value, things that are good conduits for energies in general. Pretty much any kind of sacrifice works, but the things that I've seen most tied to are copper and that white flower, the air flower. So it seems like there's probably a pretty strong tie to botanicals in that respect, especially when it comes to herbs and healing things. So you may turn to those individuals in your community that are stronger with healing herbs and things like that, and you may look to those for offerings. Of course, your standard meads and things like that are appropriate because they are good conduits for energy, and just in general they make good sacrifices due to the nature of the fact that they do, upon being poured out, they are trans-barrier. They are just very good conduits for offerings. There's a lot of meta reasons why using things like mead is both symbolically and just physically appropriate as a medium of offering. So can't go wrong there. Burned herbs, incenses, things like that would probably be appropriate. Symbols of healing. Now keep in mind, a lot of the symbols that we have of healing now are actually tied to Greek mythology. So, caduceus staff and things like that. You're going to want to look at what symbols you are using and maybe stay away from some of the things that are more specifically tied to other pantheons, just to show respect. It wouldn't necessarily be inappropriate due to the generalization of this symbol as a healing symbol, but if it's known to be sacred to a different god or goddess, it may not be the best offering to make to Lady Air. Simply saying. So hopefully that helps out a little bit. Hopefully that clears a few things up. Air is a particularly difficult study, which is why I didn't mind breaking into this one, and it helps me to deepen my own understanding and association with the goddess, and to better understand some different aspects of the mythology that I may not have made these same correlations, when I first studied her decades ago. So absolutely, if you guys come across other obscure gods and goddesses you want me to look into, hit it my way. As I get an opportunity, I'll spend some time, do some digging, see what I can come up with. I make no promises, but it is a fun and growing experience, and I like to see us all kind of grow together. I like it. I think it's a good thing. So yeah, thank you guys. This is one that was written in by a number of people over the past couple of years, and I was like, all right, I think I can slap something together now. Looked for a bit, and options are really, really limited because there's just not that much about her in the lore. There's very, very little. Other than name drops, there's not a whole lot. So it's you build on what you can, and then you start to, and this is my stance with the lore in general. There's only that much lore that exists about our gods and goddesses that has been passed down, that survived. Most of the stories never made it. Most of the stories didn't get written down. They survive in mentions in other poems. There's references to works that we know didn't exist, that don't still exist, that didn't survive. There's no copy of it to go back and compare to. But they're mentioned specifically by name in some of these, sources. So there's obviously things that didn't make it. We can obviously surmise there were large chunks that did not make it due to the oral nature of the tradition and the fact that by the time these things were being written down, they were being written down by Christian monks, and there were specific reasons why certain things were being preserved. The excerpts from the Codex Regius that make it into the Prosetta are just snippets. They're just pieces. Now they seem to be pretty core, important pieces to the world-building element, which is probably why they were the ones that made it. But I can only imagine the sheer number of stories and folk tales about the gods and goddesses that just didn't survive. And I fear that Lady Air is one of those that, despite her importance, was one that got overlooked. So, researching Air is kind of like trying to research Idun. it's kind of difficult. It's just it's a bit of a handful. And it's not bad, it's just kind of difficult. So anyway, thank you all for watching. I greatly appreciate your support and continued patronage. Stay tuned. We'll see what comes up here in the near future. I am working on trying to get things back up and running with the podcast version. Bear with me. It's a scheduling thing more than anything else. It's just having time to sit down and edit and transition those to the file format to be uploaded to the podcatchers. I only have so much free time, and there's only so many things that I can divert my attention from other obligations. So you guys get it. You understand. I'll have it going again and see if I can't get back on some kind of a more standardized track with it. So bear with me. We'll see where it goes. Hail to you all. Thank you. And may your hearth fires burn bright. Okay, hopefully my microphone will stay put, not pop clean off. I don't have a collared shirt on today like I usually do. So, updates. Fairly simple. Life continues on. Holy crap, I have like zero downtime. It's crazy. I'm working weird, wonky hours, and it's good. It's good. I've caught my stride. Everything's rocking along. I'm not worn out like I used to be. Oh, I was so dog tired when I first started this double job thing. But I found my stride. I'm picking it up. I've got pretty good energy now. I've actually dropped a little bit of weight because of it. Doing good, liking it. Well, in as much, it's a job. It's good work though. So no major complaints. It's been good for me, I think. So other than that, life is rocking along. I continue to work heavily on my D&D campaign. Like I said before, the team went through the dungeon. We were gonna have a session this month, but it was just not in the cards scheduling wise with work and birthday and just Father's Day and more work. It's just not in the cards for June. June seems to be too heavy a month, so we're going to do one hopefully early July, and either early or late July. We'll see. Depends on when I can make things work. But hopefully I'll have some more updates. My plan is to, and for DMs out there, if you're looking for a way to kind of get your party started, don't be afraid to power level your characters early on. You do not have to abide by the rules of experience points and the way that the characters progress. I go through and do milestone progression, and so what I told my players, early on is that I really intended for things to kind of kick off at level 5, but I had some newbie players that I wanted to walk through some of the lower level stuff so that they could get the hang of the roles and what to do without the overcomplications of some of the more advanced level things. And so we did that. Started them all as level 2 and then rolled them through my prologue campaign. The prologue of the campaign, and that's what we're wrapping up right now. They're going to come back into a huge exposition dump, and then I will have power leveled them up to level 5. It got to a point where every other session, every couple sessions anyway, I would level them up, so they went from 2 to 3 to 4, and now they're going to hit 5 at the culmination of the prologue, and this is where I'm going to cut them loose on the world, and then we're going to slow down to a more normal progression for leveling. Gives them a chance to get in, get their feet wet, get to know their characters a little bit. Lets my newbies learn a little bit about the basic combat system, go through a couple level ups so they get an idea of what they want out of their character. And then now that they've kind of got a feel for a little bit of that, I'm just going to cut them loose on the world, and we're going to go open world. The prologue was a little railroady, but it was kind of necessary to set up the exposition for everything that I want, laying the groundwork. And then from here on out, sky's the limit. I'm going to let them do what they want to do, and I'll react to it, and we'll see where we go, which means a lot of work on my end. But you don't have to be as crazy as I am when it comes to D&D, but I immerse myself in the creation of this world. It is my baby, my magnum opus. I freaking love this thing. Renothia is my jam, so in all my downtime, what little I have, I'm constantly clicking away at maps and area maps, mostly building dungeon maps and things like that for side plots. I've got complex side plots, multiple factions, all kinds of things. And I'm constantly adding stuff to it. I'm constantly going, I really need to go back and re-examine the motivations of this villain so that I can make it more immersive for them, deeper, give it something more. So we'll see. We'll see. I don't know. Hopefully they'll like it. Yeah, this is the part where they really get to shine, and we get our D&D on. It's going to be fun. I'm excited for it. So anyway, that's pretty much the update. I'm going to keep the after credits thing kind of light. I'll have more for the after credits in the future. It's just been crazy, so we'll see. I don't know. Anyway, we're live in 3, 2, 1. Let's jam. Scrap that. You got edits to make. All right. 3, 2, 1. Let's jam. Okay. Let's try this again. I forgot my notes. All right. We're live in 3, 2, 1. Let's jam.